Welcome to The Difference Engine, the show for founders, investors, and tech innovators. When the summer of love erupted, it focused the whole world's attention on San Francisco, a social uprising the likes of which the world had never seen. Many thought there'd be a revolution starting there. There would be, but not in the way people suspected. A cluster of government research labs, defence contractors, and world-class universities, combined with cheap real estate, a counterculture soaked in post-war optimism, and rule breakers looking for a new start. The cultures didn't clash, they combined. And by the late 60s, they had lit the fuse for an explosion of electronic innovation and the emergence of brand new industries, the phenomenon that is Silicon Valley. Often imitated, but never surpassed, for decades there appears to have been no limits to what new technology developed there could achieve. One young PR pro had a front seat as it all happened. That person was Andy Cunningham.
And today, on The Difference Engine, we're super excited to welcome the tech positioning and branding legend who had the incredible, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to work alongside legendary Apple founder and category greatest of all time, Steve Jobs. Are we jealous? Hell yes. Andy's been at the crossroads of world-class marketing, branding, positioning, and communicating the next big thing for over 35 years. Andy's also a recognized thought leader sharing her rich knowledge as author of Amazon bestseller, Get to Aha, Discover Your Positioning DNA, and Dominate Your Competition. What we particularly love about Andy as founder and president of Cunningham Collective is that she continues to leave her stamp on the tech strategy world with over 200 happy clients that have collectively raised billions during her engagement with them. This is a conversation you're going to want to replay and take notes from.
Welcome to The Difference Engine, Andy.
Thank you, guys, and it's really great to be here. Thanks for having me.
First thing we wanted to talk with you about, and this is very much from your point of view, what is it that makes Silicon Valley and the US West Coast special? Is it really the tech? Or by now, is it all the other skills that have wrapped around it? Strategy, marketing, finance, the whole gamut around it.
The whole thing about the West Coast is this notion that it is the furthest west of the Wild West of the United States. And if you know anything about the Wild West, you know that people made up their own rules. They did their own thing. They wore their own clothes. They staked out their territory and did land grabs. And there was all kinds of irrational behavior from the view back east. And that mentality spread all the way to the West Coast and is rampant today. And that is really, I think, what makes Silicon Valley different. Now, there's a whole bunch of other things that come into play, like the incredible weather that we have, the incredible opportunity to ski in the afternoon and go surfing in the morning. There's a whole lot of that. And we have some great universities that pump out some amazing people. But basically, the notion is it is a place where tradition really doesn't matter and you can be anything or do anything or have anything. But I grew up in Chicago and I was going to start a business in Chicago, but I realized how incredibly difficult it was to be a young woman trying to start a business. Couldn't raise money, couldn't get anybody's backing. I wasn't a wealthy person. I didn't come from a fancy family. And so I made the decision to move to California to work in the tech industry for a couple of years until I learned the ropes, and then I would come back to Chicago and do it here. But frankly, I fell so madly in love with Silicon Valley and the tech industry that I couldn't even consider the idea of leaving. So that is where I still am.
And you've lived through the four big waves of tech.
Yes.
In the Valley: PC, internet, mobile, and now AI. That's some ride, but you got a hell of an introduction to it back in about 83.
Around about the time you met a personal hero of mine, somebody that I cited in my MBA because he was just so influential, Regis McKenna.
Oh, yes. Just tell you quickly the story. I was working at a public relations firm in Chicago called Burson Marsteller. Everybody probably knows that name. They're a world famous PR firm. And I had this great opportunity to work occasionally with Harold Burson, which was really a wonderful experience. And they put me in the tech group because I had been writing tech stories for a trade publication prior to getting the job at Burson Marsteller. And so I got this opportunity to work with a little company called Bell and Howell, which was remarketing the Apple II computer as what they were referring to as the Black Apple. And the client gave me one of these things. Now, mind you, this is like could even have been 1982. And I fell in love with this computer. I mean, in love with it. And I could not get my hands off of it. I was imagining all these amazing things you could do with it. And then Burson Marsteller decided to open up an office in Silicon Valley. And I'm like, do you think I could work there? Raising my hand. And however, I went out there and I met the people that were running the office, and I didn't feel particularly in sync with their point of view and their mindset. And so I decided to take the rest of that day and interview with other agencies. And the very last agency that I met with that day was Regis McKenna Inc. And while I was in the meeting with Regis, he offers me the job to come to California and lead the team that was going to launch Macintosh. And this was like a dream come true. I could not even believe he was saying this. I was a kid. I was 24, I think. So that is what I chose to do, and I will never regret it. It was just an incredible experience. Working with Regis was an incredible experience. The man is a marketing genius, but of course, working with Steve Jobs, who in his own right is a marketing genius, I was very lucky.
Talk about luck, but luck is always good luck and good management. You arrived on the account just before Apple really started to be a significant player. And new product launches were just about to happen that would define the company for decades afterwards.
Yes, that's true. I came in summer of '83, and we were 6 months away from launching Macintosh at that point. The company had just launched Lisa, which I was not involved in. Regis McKenna was the PR firm, and Apple, of course, launched the product. And unfortunately for Apple and everyone else, the product was a pretty enormous failure. In fact, this is a little known fact, but all of the inventory of Lisas are buried in Nevada, physically buried underground in Nevada.
Probably still dig them up now because they'll be still dry and a bit dusty,
Probably
but they'll be okay.
Probably could. So what happened is the team at Regis McKenna was very frustrated and discouraged, and most of them had quit before I arrived, except for one young woman named Jane Anderson, who she and I became, I think, world-class partners in this effort to write a plan to launch Macintosh, to do it together, and that's what we did. So you're right. That is the moment. I think the Mac launch was the moment that Steve kind of moved from being an amazing success, because he'd already been on the cover of Time magazine, we should remember. But it took the company from that crazy startup out in California to a real corporation.
Yeah.
And that was just an incredible opportunity and experience.
Yeah, I wanted to just dig in. I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but we like a meandering conversation around here. So what was the dynamic between the PR, marketing, external dudes and Woz and Jobs as the creators? Was there much interaction? Did you go your own way? Like, how did that all work?
Did you have any fights?
So let me do the Woz and Steve part of this first. So at this point in time, Woz and Steve were not really working together closely. Steve had this project idea, which was not his idea. And by the way, most of the things that happened at Apple were not Steve's idea. What they were was a germ of an idea that he took and blossomed into a market or a product or whatever. So this Macintosh idea was not Steve's idea, but he glommed onto it as the next big thing. And so he had been kind of moved out of Apple corporate, if you will, and got his own building in Cupertino with the pirate flag hanging above it. And it was a completely separate group of people. There were 100 people involved, and he only wanted 100. And so the Woz part of it, he stayed in the Apple II group, and he was never in the building. I never saw Woz in the building. I occasionally talked to him once in a while, but very, very infrequently. So there was not any interaction between Woz and Steve, at least what I saw. Maybe they went out for a beer or something else. I'm not sure. There was no animosity between them.
They just had defined roles, right? But you were definitely on the Steve side of the house, so to speak.
I was totally 100% on the Steve side, and he only allowed 100 people to be on that Mac team, which included external people. So because I came from Regis McKenna, there were like only 3 of us from Regis allowed in the building. Regis, of course, myself, and then Jane Anderson. And over time, we were able to bring one or two more people, PR people, into the equation. And then the ad agency, the brilliant people who designed the 1984 ad. There was a small cluster of them who were allowed in the building, but we had different badges and everything. It was a completely separate group from what was going on at Apple Corporate.
What was their thoughts at the time? Because they, if we cast our mind back, the personal computer as it was starting to emerge, and certainly one that had a Windows type interface, was something that appeals to people, certainly on their own. And the business world was starting to understand that these things could start to make a massive impact on their business. And how did Apple think about that in terms of, was this a business product? Was it a personal product? Was it a personal business product? What was it?
I think at the time they believed that it was as Steve liked to call it, the computer for the rest of us. So Steve's hope and dream is that all of the people out there using the IBM PC, which had been launched in 1981, his hope was that all the people using that computer would throw it out the window and replace it with this elegantly designed, beautiful, easy to use thing called Macintosh. And once we launched it, we believed that would happen, and it didn't happen. It did not happen. No one believed that their head of IT would approve the acquisition of this crazy new computer. In fact, we did a focus group right before the launch. And this focus group was with a bunch of people who were using business computers inside of giant corporations, right? So they were typical, really serious business people at relatively senior levels. We ran them through the Mac demo, let them play with it. At the end of it, we went around and asked everybody what they thought about it. To a T, every one of them thought it was the best experience that they'd ever had with a computer. They would love to use it in their day-to-day work, and how come this hasn't happened sooner? Then the last question we asked them was, do you think that your company would buy these computers for your team? And to a T, they all said, absolutely not.
Wow, so you are defining a brand new category in category terms because it doesn't exist.
It didn't. So, the product had some flaws as it relates to business computing. It didn't have any networking. It didn't even have cursor keys, by the way, guys, when we launched this thing. Didn't have printing. It didn't have a lot of the things that business people wanted, but it did have this incredible ease of use. So this is actually the whole reason why Steve ultimately got fired from Apple. It's because he continued to defend Macintosh and continued to improve it and work on it, but it was never selling and it wasn't making any money. And sooner or later, John Sculley said, we can't afford to do this anymore. We have to drop Macintosh. And they got into a fight, as the story tells, in a board meeting, and that was the end of Steve with Apple. However, for whatever reason, it was not the end of Macintosh. They didn't kill the product, which I kind of thought they would. They let it kind of flounder around and not make its way. There was a man there named Jean-Louis Gasset, great supporter of Steve's and a great supporter of the Mac, and I think that he possibly single-handedly saved the product.
Wasn't it through him that actually Jobs made his way back to Apple? Because Gasset had a company called BIOS, and Apple attempted to buy it to be the grown-up operating system. And they wanted about 250 billion for the company, or million for the company, and that was too rich. So in the end, they went and bought Jobs' Next for about 400. And the genius of that was it wasn't just about bringing a new operating system into the company. It brought Jobs back into the company.
And I think, frankly, that was the guise was, we need the operating system. The reality was they wanted Steve to come back because they'd been through a couple of CEOs,
Yes.
And Steve wasn't. It's also important for everybody to know that Steve was not the CEO of Apple when he did this Mac thing. That was Mike Markkula was the CEO for a long time. And then Steve made the decision to hire an expert in marketing, which was John Sculley from Pepsi. And he brought in Sculley to be the CEO. So Steve was not the CEO until he got fired and came back. But he had grown up a ton by then. He really learned how to be a CEO. He was gone for 8 years, and those 8 years were incredibly maturing for him in learning how to manage people, how to run a company, how to do product, all that stuff. He learned a lot.
That's a sort of an experience to die for, to see this giant of the industry go away and mature and come back like a different being. In all of that particular early stage journey in Apple, what were your sort of favorite bits about that? What were the most sort of rewarding experiences? The one you still think about today and think, I'm so glad I learned that? Or wasn't it amazing to be there at that moment?
So many things. I could go on forever, but just a couple of the one big thing that I learned is how important design and quality and environment are to selling something. So Steve was a genius at figuring out what the environment, literally the environment around a sale, whether that's a sale of a product to a company or to a human, or if it's a journalist wanting to write about Apple, the environment is critical. So I learned that from him. The two moments that I will never forget because they were very rare is one when he said thank you to me. So after the Mac launch, we were up on stage kind of clearing things away. Everybody was gone out of the room. And he literally walked up to me and he said, thank you. Just like that. And literally, he'd never said that before. He was throwing things at me and everyone else and swearing and insulting and all the other things he did. But that moment meant a lot because he never said it. And the second moment was after the Mac launch when we launched the Apple IIc. If you remember that computer, I was working with him launching that product as well. And we were doing it at Moscone Center at what ultimately has become the Worldwide Developer Conference, which is happening right now. But it was a much smaller thing back then at Moscone. And Steve was there, of course, because he was going to do a big launch of the IIc. It happened to be a day there was a big earthquake here. So all the news went to the earthquake and not to the product. So one of the things we did as we were walking around the floor at Moscone Center is we were talking about all kinds of things, and he started to tell me about a girlfriend that he had. And I had met this girlfriend because I was there with him the night that he met her. Her name was Jenny. It was at a French restaurant in New York where they met, and he ended up running into her accidentally. He didn't even know her, but they literally ran into each other in the lobby of the restaurant. He was out there talking to her for like 45 minutes, and then she became his girlfriend. And he was telling me about her on this walk around the thing, and intensely talking to me as if I was his best friend, very tender and gentle, loving conversation that we were having. And then this earthquake hits. Now, I'm from Chicago, mind you, and I have never, ever experienced an earthquake. So everything is shaking. Things are falling down. Booths are collapsing. People are unstable. And Steve is continuing to talk to me. But I'm looking out of the side of my eye around of other people, and they're kind of panicking a little bit. But Steve never stops telling me about this girlfriend. And finally, we run into Mitch Kapor. Literally, Mitch was coming this way, and we're coming. And Mitch runs up to Steve, and he says, "Steve, do you feel the earthquake? It's an earthquake." And Steve looks around. He goes, "What earthquake?" It was an example of the amazing focus that man had, which I think is probably one of his greatest assets.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's amazing. We think about Microsoft, we think about Amazon, we think we know all the backstory. Clearly, there's a lot more that goes on. And positioning,
yes.
That was your part of this story. It's extremely hard, but it's been at the center of everything you do. You talk about Steve's focus. You focus on positioning. That's your super skill, I guess. Would you call it that?
Yep, that's my thing. That is my thing. I learned a lot of it from Regis, I want to say. Regis was very, very passionate about how important positioning is especially to a tech product when the landscape is filled with, things that nobody has ever heard of or know what's going. Back then, now there's hundreds of thousands of products out there. But back then, the industry comprised about 200 people, about 100 companies, and, 50 products. There was like nothing going on.
And you really had to explain to people how it actually worked then,
Yeah, you had to educate people. There was a lot of education, and PR was the mechanism through which that all occurred. All of that education happened mostly through Regis McKenna and the people who left Regis McKenna to start other companies, me being one, Melissa Wagner being another, and many others who went off and took the Regis philosophy with them. And we were the ones who educated the world about these products and what you could do with them and why they were important. But today, and I know we're going to get into this at another point, but today, because there are hundreds of thousands of products and no one needs to be educated anymore. And also there's so many of them are so easy to use that our kids grew up doing this. And if we don't understand how to use it, we just ask our 5-year-old,
Yeah.
Right. So, because they're all digital natives and we are, or you were one of the first digital migrants, I guess, or immigrants.
Yes, I was a migrant.
Jonathan and I are migrants too.
We traveled a whole 200 miles.
Yes, we did. I just find it fascinating that we got to this position in a way that you had a front seat for that, the way you tell it, it's just not quite look, but it meanders more than one might imagine, right? When you look at how big the tech industry is today, you think it just sort of arrived. It didn't. It came with a meandering path, right?
It sure did. And we've had a lot of bumps in the road. I mean, the whole .com crash of 2000 annihilated this industry, annihilated it.
I was annihilated. I remember.
Yeah, me too. It was devastating for years. And then it was followed by the financial crisis of 2008, which doubly annihilated the industry. So it has not been an easy ride, but look at the difference it's made.
That tells us the industry is actually very robust. I mean, it comes back from the annihilations. But I guess history does tell us that even the strongest tech firms and categories aren't for life.
Right.
Even if they don't have these sort of existential events, they will eventually run out of steam. Somebody will come across, do something better. So,
absolutely.
In your experience, how should sort of tech leaders behave before their time runs out, even if they're not hit by a crash or an earthquake?
Well, you guys probably remember the Bunch, right? Those were the computer companies that were, they were the mini computers, and the Bunch, Burroughs, Univac, NCR, Hewlett Packard, I think might have been one of them. Anyway, the Bunch existed, and none of those companies exist anymore today. None of them. They're not, and this is what happens. You invent something new, like they did in that world, and then it morphs and it grows, and then someone else, cannibalizes you, right? Someone else takes over for you. So tech leaders have a rough time of it and now the cycles are so much shorter. Those cycles used to be like maybe 30 years, and now the cycles are shorter. So I think, we're watching Apple right now, right? Apple just announced their Apple Intelligence AI strategy, which boosted their stock today, which is great. But still, they're kind of behind, right? They're no longer the leader in this.
It's not wholly their tech, right?
Exactly.
In a way, it's sort of Microsoft's tech, really, with the open AI.
Exactly. Microsoft being the most valuable company in the world today, NVIDIA being number 2. So it has changed. And NVIDIA, I remember NVIDIA when they were this scrappy little chip company trying to figure out how to make a chip for gaming with the graphic, the GPU.
Absolutely. I did all the PR for them at a gaming convention in Amsterdam.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I could totally...
Many moons ago.
I totally get that. And here they are today, having figured out how to adapt that GPU to this new wave, and it's completely given them a new life. So you ask, what should CEOs do when they think they're about ready to face their end? They need to do what Jensen did and figure out, how do you take the assets from your past successes, like how do you take a GPU and make it this key element of the new world of AI? Brilliant. I mean, the man is brilliant. So that's what you have to do.
His pain and suffering speech that he just gave, I don't know if you got to see that one. That is really the one he gave to the Stanford students. I told that to the team here. They thought I was joking, but I wasn't. And the only reason I had the strength to say I wasn't, or the bravery, is because he did it himself. And he said, I genuinely wish that you have pain and suffering, because only from that can you learn enough, fast enough in this game to pivot, right? You find that out slow, you're dead.
So true. And that's what you have to do.
Are you still developing separate marketing plans for each of your different channels to market? Can you really sanction messages reaching the same customers from unconnected targets? Listen, it's now the AI age. Things need to change. Positive is a different sort of AI-powered agency. From our very beginning, we've integrated marketing communications from PR to events, social to paid ads. Working smarter means working integrated. Let us show you what a truly joined-up strategy could do for your tech business. Contact Positive today with an email to hello@positivemarketing.com.
It's the obvious, really, but in our industry, there's only one constant, and that is change. And, we're now at this fourth wave of change. At last, AI has the potential to change everything. So we think businesses are going to have to radically change their business models or how they address the markets. And I thought the terminology in your book, Get to Aha, sort of stuck out at me in this respect. You've got this term, mother, mechanic, or missionary. The matriarchal mother, who's customer focused, the meticulous mechanic, who's product focused, and the visionary missionary, has got the vision of changing the world. Can you tell the listeners how they work together at these moments of change and how they move things forward?
Oh, wow. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. Yes, I discovered, this is really almost 20 years ago now, that I realized that positioning is not just about making a choice about your product and your market. It's also about understanding who you are and as a founder of a company, and the culture that you've built around yourself in order to build this product. And I realized that made a huge difference. So I started to do research on this, figure out what are these different kinds of CEOs slash companies. And I did a big manual cluster analysis of all the companies that I had worked with, and came to the conclusion that there are really three types of companies. There are these incredibly customer focused companies, these incredibly product focused companies, and then these change the world people. And if you could align your business with your DNA, I discovered you were more successful. You had a higher valuation. You sold more product. It was all about alignment, right?
This is your positioning DNA that you talk about in the book.
Yeah. So this is at the core of work that I do, is helping people understand what their DNA is and their company's DNA so that they can use it as an advantage. And I like to make the analogy of children. I have kids, and a lot of people, I'm sure in your audience, have children. And when you have a child who expresses an incredible talent for, let's just say, soccer or basketball or something, a sport like that, you don't try to steer them away from that and tell them, no, you really must play the violin. That's really what you must do. You're working against their DNA when you do that. And it's a bad decision, right? We all know as parents, it's not good to do something like that. Well, guess what? The same is true with companies. If you're a super, super product focused company, you shouldn't be trying to please the customer at every juncture. I know this goes against common wisdom, but I believe that if you look at Oracle, look at the success of Oracle over all of the decades. Have they ever paid attention to their customers? No, never.
No.
It's all about the product. So you can be a huge success in this industry if you just align your work with your DNA. If you happen to be a product focused company like Oracle, you shouldn't waste cycles trying to pay attention to every little thing your customer says and does. However, if you're a super customer focused company, you might want to focus on that and figure out other ways to make your products leading edge. So anyway, how do these work together? You have to realize that whatever you end up being, whether it's a mother mechanic or a missionary, the other two have to support you, right? So if you're a mechanic like Oracle, you still have to have a few visionaries around, and you still have to have a few customer people around. Otherwise, you'd probably go out of business. But they're not the focal point of your personality in the world. So that's how we've helped companies figure out how to use what they have. I like to say, know what you're made of so you can make something of it.
You also make the point, and sort of while we're in that sort of San Francisco mode, I was reminded of Clint Eastwood in Dirty Harry, who said, man's got to know his limitations at one point.
Yes.
And you talk about limitations too in this positioning.
Exactly. And knowing your limitations is, as we all know, if you've ever studied creative thinking, it's the less you have to work with, the more creative you can be.
Right.
Totally agree with
If
that.
you know what your DNA is, you can be much more creative and thoughtful about the other things. It's these people and companies who think that they know everything and that they are all things to all people that typically fall by the wayside, and they become part of the detritus, if you will, of the technology world. Because you can't be all things to all people, and you can't serve everybody's needs all the time. So you have to focus. This is what Steve was so good at. Focus on what you're good at.
How would you relate the uniqueness of a company, whether they're one of those three types, to their suitability for a category? Do you think some categories favor producty companies, some categories favor brandy, culty, change the world type companies? Others are, just more about the tech or the people. Like, do you feel like there's a match between a category you're trying to play in and your DNA? Does that work?
Actually, I don't think so, but that's a really interesting thing to explore, and I'm going to take that away and think a lot more about it. But my feeling about category is that I don't think it's just what Gartner and Forrester tell us the categories are, right? It's not.
It certainly isn't. It certainly is not.
I am a big believer in using category strategically, and I have had a number of successes with my clients, Cisco being the biggest example, of raising their valuation by billions of dollars simply by taking them out of the hub and router category, which is where they were when I met them, and putting them into a new category that we called the three-legged stool of the industry. So not a category that Gartner and Forrester follow, but at the time there was Microsoft, there was Intel. Microsoft represented the software world, Intel represented the hardware world, and the internet was just emerging, and there was no company to represent that. Why not make the leading hub and router company represent that? And we turned them from a hub and router company with a valuation like this into a part of the industry, what the press called Wintelco, Windows, Intel, Cisco.
Yep.
They became the third leg of the entire technology industry, and their valuation went from here to here. And John Chambers, who was one of the very best CEOs I have ever worked with,
yes,
unbelievable CEO, was gracious enough to let me write about that story in my book. So it is in the book. But that was a category choice. It was put Cisco into a category of only two other companies, and those two companies had very little in common other than that they were supporting the entire tech industry. So why not create a category of the three supporting the entire tech industry? Very different from positioning them as a leader in the hub and router business. Wow. Very strategic choice.
Very much so.
We're not here to give free advice to old timers like IBM and HPE, but also, you've got the current winners, Meta and Apple. I mean, some of those guys need to change their game pretty hard, right? And they should be having these conversations internally. Do you think they are, or do you think, they're just sort of victims of circumstance to a certain extent? Do you think that these strategic category and positioning conversations truly happen in the way they did with Chambers and Jobs?
I think very few CEOs think about that, to be honest with you. I think Jensen thought about it, and I think that's how he pivoted into what he's doing today. Brilliant. But if I look at even Apple, I think Apple is starting to struggle with who are they. I like to call Apple the essential luxury company, right? Because we will pay whatever he charges, whatever they charge. If you're in that ecosystem, you'll pay whatever for the phones and the laptops, everything. And you can't live without that ecosystem. So you're sucked in through that. But as far as figuring out how to do something beyond that, right? Yeah. It's tough. It's tough. And Tim Cook and his companies had a hard time creating the next big thing since Steve left. So as long as this ecosystem remains to be really important, I think the Apple Intelligence thing they're adding to it is really good. It's a little later than you'd think, but it's happening, and that's a great thing. And their stock got boosted today, so that's good. But companies like that have to think about it. I think Meta is already doing a good job with moving themselves into a new place. But if I look at like HP, so there are two HPs now, right? There's HP Enterprise and the other HP. And HPE right now has an amazing opportunity to reposition itself as an AI rack producer, right? AI server producer.
Right.
So I hope they do that.
Well, as somebody who worked there for a little while, I'd be really amazed if they could pull that move off. But you're absolutely right. It's almost there for the taking. They've got the data piece.
There's nobody grabbing it. They could easily do it. They're right here in Silicon Valley where they could make it happen. But again, are they thinking about it? I don't know.
I think there's another piece of research to be done here, Andy. If we just think about the companies we've just talked about, the ones that are most successful at pivoting appear to be the ones still run by their founders. I think there's something, maybe that's founder DNA has to be in there to be able to move the company forward. They're strangely the best people to kill their own babies.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to make a story about, though, another founder in another company, which is Amazon, and their founder, Jeff Bezos, who made a very purposeful shift in their DNA, which is hard to do. I don't know, 15, 17 years ago, when he went from being a mechanic, a very product-focused company, to being what he likes to call Earth's most customer-centric company. So he went from being a mechanic to being a mother, and it was very purposeful. And the first thing he did is announce the new mission. We're going to be Earth's most customer-centric company. The second thing he did was buy Zappos. If those of you remember Zappos, it was the online shoe company. As if Jeff Bezos couldn't figure out how to sell shoes online. That was not why he bought that company. He bought that company for Tony Hsieh and his maniacal customer focus, because he knew he was going to twist the company into a customer-focused company. Then he told everybody in the company, I want every meeting to have an empty chair in it to represent the customer, because when you're looking around the room having a meeting, I want you to look at that empty chair and I want you to think, what would my customer think? What would my customer think? And these little tiny changes went on for 15 years. And now they are pretty much Earth's most they're the everything store. And he's no longer the CEO. And this still continues. Now, it hasn't been very long that he hasn't been the CEO. So we'll see.
But you're right. He sewed enough DNA in there. I mean, like that whole thing about writing down the point of the meeting.
Exactly.
And everybody reading it before they start.
Yep.
You try and do that in a modern organization where people don't have the attention span. But he forced it through.
He did many things like that. Many things. Yeah.
So all this is the sort of theme of what we've just discussed here, which is know what you are and ruthlessly pursue it.
Exactly.
That seems to be the big message of the last 15 minutes.
I really believe that's true. Whether you're a human or a company, by the way.
The best companies are sort of the embodiments of their founders.
Yeah.
That's the mantle you take on as a leader, is that your values should be embodied in the company.
I was just wondering if we could just nail something that you said to us previously, because we are fabulous believers in designing categories. And we were thinking about work we've done, maybe in the cybersecurity space with Pantera and creating a new category for them in automated security validation. But you paused me to think, because what you said was you should focus on the subcategories. You're a firm believer in that. And I think our listeners would really like to know your philosophy on, do you go and create a brand new category, or do you work within categories? I just think that's a really fascinating part of your take.
I do have, I think, a very antithetical position on this from most people. But to me, what you did with that security company was not create a new category. You created a unique position within a category.
That's what you made me think.
Because here's the thing. A category is more than one company. So you can't create a category of one. If you're going to create a category, you have to have lots of other companies in it. So if you're really hell-bent for leather on creating a category, you better start accepting other companies into it in a way that is welcoming, and they have to consider themselves part of that company. So what I think is that subcategories to me are where you can really innovate. And I gave you guys this example, which I love, which is the Dodge minivan example. So
please take us through that again, because Brits, some of the European listeners here don't even know Dodge, but you can take us through that.
Okay, so Dodge, I don't even think the brand exists anymore, but it was a brand of car from the larger automotive brand called Chrysler, which has now got another name. Stellantis, thank you. That's the big corporate name. Anyway, many years ago, one of their sub-brands was called Dodge, and Dodge was a very old and stodgy brand, and they had developed a sedan. Dodge had developed a sedan, and unfortunately it wasn't selling, so they had this glut of inventory of these chassis for this particular sedan, and they didn't know what to do with them, because when you have an inventory glut in that kind of an industry, it's a big cost center, right? It becomes a huge cost. So someone, I don't know who it was, but some brilliant person said, hey, why don't we put a different top on that same chassis? That way we can use the chassis and we'll just kind of figure out what it is that we should do with that. More thinking went into it, and they decided to do a very rough example of what has become the minivan, right? So they said, instead of making it a sedan, let's make it a bigger vehicle, but the same size chassis. So they did this, and it was met with an amazing positive response in the market. And so they started to refine and refine and refine until today we have this minivan, which is brilliant. And that was an accident. As I said before, constraint breeds creativity. Well, problems also breed creativity. And they had this inventory problem, and they solved it in this way, which I think is a brilliant thing. So to me, the minivan is a subcategory of the automotive market.
For sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
We're not trying to create a brand new automotive thing. So I think you can make your way very well with subcategories. I think it's really hard. And I've tried, some companies have come to me and they said, we want to create a new category. And I'm like, God, I don't think you have the money to do that. I just don't, I just don't think so.
No, or the time, perhaps.
Yeah, what I love is you're not saying, give me enough money and we'll do it. You're just being honest.
Yeah, well, they don't. It's decades and it's billions of dollars. I mean, it's just not, to me, it's just not possible. Now, a new category that is emerging is this VTOL category, this vertical takeoff and landing vehicle.
Nice.
Okay, there's a lot of players in it. It hasn't emerged yet. Who's going to lead that? That's a new category to me. It's a new category of transportation, and we'll see what happens there. But no one can just say, I'm the VTOL category. You have to say, I'm in the VTOL category. And the only thing that gives a category legitimacy is other people in it.
I love it. I love it.
It's a very interesting category, actually, Andy, because it's like the third coming of VTOL, just as AI we have now is about the third coming of AI.
Exactly.
You had helicopters, you had crafts like the Osprey who would do it, but that's not for everybody. That's not everybody. And that's the thing, making it generally applicable.
Yeah, exactly. So I had a professor in college who used to tell me there's nothing new under the sun. And I think that's a very interesting way of looking at it. What we keep doing as humans is we keep taking something that has already existed and we make it better. And this was Steve Jobs' most amazing skill. It's like, let's go look at what Xerox has, take the good stuff and make it better.
If you think about the history of Apple, it is the history of very fast following.
Absolutely.
Make stuff better.
Which is a great strategy.
And maybe that's a message.
Yeah,
it's a message to all entrepreneurs. I mean, it's how the Japanese powered their economic miracle in the 60s and 70s. Look at stuff and make it better. Make better cars, make better audio, make better instruments.
Exactly. You don't have to invent everything. That is, by the way, one of the flaws of Silicon Valley. So we started this conversation by talking about what makes this place special. One of the flaws of this place is there's this attitude that everything has to be so different, that whatever you create has to be so different from everything else. Well, fast following is exactly the opposite of that. It's how do I make this the same but better?
Wow. So maybe we should change the name of this pod to The Better Engine.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but still, it's just an interesting insight. I love it.
San Francisco has been going through quite a tough time in recent years. It's been through it before. We touched earlier in this podcast about its amazing ability to reinvent itself and go forward. And I think looking at the area recently, it seems to be recovering from a bit of a dip in the last few years. Do you think that the region has got what it takes to lead the next generation of tech? And who do you think are going to be the standout companies and the individuals that are going to lead that change?
Yeah, that's a great question because it has been going through some difficulties. But the companies that are calling the shots, if you will, are still in Silicon Valley. And you just take NVIDIA as a great example of this. This is a company that is going to spring hundreds of other little companies that are going to come out of NVIDIA. It's like you plant a seed of a weed somewhere and it just blossoms, right? And then all of a sudden you have weeds all over your yard, right? It's going to spring hundreds of other companies, and they're going to start off in Silicon Valley because that's where their people are. And the same is true with Microsoft, which is why Seattle became such a great place to be. So I think the West Coast in particular is still going to be the generator of all of this. I'm chairing a seminar at Stanford University. So I've had an opportunity I didn't go to Stanford. I went to school in the Midwest, but I had an opportunity to really understand how Stanford teaches people. And I've also had a number of years of experience of doing the executive education program at Harvard. Probably 20 times I've done that program. And the differences between the way these two universities teach is night and day. Harvard teaches people how to do things by learning from the past. Stanford teaches people how to do things by looking at what's possible in the future. And they are completely different philosophies. And that's the philosophy that goes on in Silicon Valley and on the West Coast. It's not about learning from the past. It's about learning what's possible in the future.
That's amazing.
And so as long as we have that educational system and these big companies sprouting all these other startups coming from the West Coast, that's still going to be the font of all of this. Now, some of those companies will move to other places. And it's not to say that innovation can't happen in other parts of the world. It certainly can, and it does. But it's not the font of it like it is in Silicon Valley for all these reasons.
So the engine still persists.
And then once the engine is there, there's lots of little engines that come out of that big engine, and then that sprouts more. And it's a flywheel in many ways.
Because one man's weed is another man's wildflowers, as they say.
Exactly.
We probably shouldn't talk about weed in California in the same breath, but it's probably the wrong connection to make. Just on the last thing you were talking about with the education thing, as somebody who had to suffer the Harvard Business Review case studies, literally to get an MBA, I had to read about some luggage company I'd never heard of that was long dead and write what I learned from it. I mean,
exactly.
That was one part of the MBA, and the other was write a dissertation, which happened to be on the Apple Newton. And I'm like, okay, I'm actually learning something from this and I'm learning pretty much nothing except how to pass an exam for the other stuff. So I have the experience.
You've been through that.
I've been through that, sadly. Can you tell us the CEO organization you're talking about? That organization is international and people can get involved with it internationally, right?
No, I mean, CEO is a very closed organization. It's only 2,000 members worldwide. And in order to get into CEO, you have to have been a leader in the YPO organization.
Remind us what YPO is.
So YPO stands for Young Presidents Organization. That is an international organization of people who run companies who are young. They're under the age of, I'm going to say 55. And they are running a company that meets certain qualifications. You had to have a certain number of employees. You had to be making a certain revenue. It's a great organization for people who are running companies because it gives you a group of people who are not trying to get something out of you. So those of you who are CEOs in the audience know, and you guys know, that everybody has an agenda with you as the CEO. They all have an agenda. It's really nice and refreshing to talk to people every now and then who don't have an agenda with you, who can also give you decent advice, and they're not trying to push for something. So that's what YPO does.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you for your incredible wisdom, the incredible stories you've shared, and spending all this time with us. And I'm sure the listeners are going to get a kick out of this. There's lots to listen to, just gold.
This was a very thorough and very fun conversation, guys. I really enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you for listening to The Difference Engine. If you want to learn more about Andy Cunningham or get in touch, check her out at cunninghamcollective.com or email her at team@gettoaha.com. That's team@GET2AHA.com. And if you want to explore further the category design topics discussed in this episode, then please read our blog post at becategorical.com or tune into the other episodes of The Difference Engine wherever you get your podcasts.
And of course, if you're in tech and need a strategy to categorize your business, product or service, then we can help. Get in touch with us via the show notes or again at becategorical.com.
And remember, don't be better, be different. Thanks for listening.